All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight for day 6 of All Things Autism. So, I'm spending all of the month of April discussing various topics regarding autism, autism families, autism language, autism issues, different perspectives from those who are actually autistic versus those like myself who are family members of autistic individuals. And so I wanted to take some time tonight to share some information regarding how words matter in the autistic community. Um, and really highlighting certain things that are popping up nowadays in terms of the proper word choice. So before I go there, I want to share a little bit of information regarding what is happening this week. And I first want to start off with talking about the South Florida Autism Charter School 10th annual walk, which is happening on Saturday, April the 9th at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you are local here in South Florida, the event will be happening at the SFAX campus here in Hialeah. If you have questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out. Send me a message if you want to find out more details and actually attend the event. The second thing I want to talk about is tomorrow I will be doing a LinkedIn audio show with the fantastic Troy Holt, who is going to be hosting me during his LinkedIn audio session. And I will be discussing real estate and the probate process. And this is a topic that is very important for pretty much each and every one of us because when we talk about real estate and probate, we're not just talking about real estate that we own ourselves. We're talking about real estate that we potentially may inherit from other family members. We're talking about real estate that is owned by other family members. It's just important to understand what happens to your real estate in the event that something happens to you. And last but not least, as we're going through this month-long series of all things autism, I ask you to please send me messages at sandyblaw305@gmail.com if you have questions, concerns, topics of interest, or things that you want to learn a little bit more about. So now that that is out of the way in terms of the very basics, I want to remind you that April is Autism Acceptance Month. And tonight's topic is words matter, nonverbal versus non-speaking. Now, this topic is very, very close to my heart because my nephew is what you would call nonverbal or non-speaking. And the reason I'm discussing both of these terms is because many times I would say the terms may be used improperly. And what I'm learning at this stage is that my nephew is actually non speaking because he doesn't speak yet. Um, but the term nonverbal would not be accurate because keep in mind, when we're talking nonverbal, we're including things like crying, holding out your arms to be picked up, pointing to items, using gestures, using sign language, using a device to communicate. And just so that you know, in terms of my nephew's communication skills, while he is non speaking, he is able to verbalize his desires, his wants, his needs, and sometimes other details that he wants to share. So he technically would be classified, I would say, as non speaking because he actually uses a device to communicate. He uses certain picture cards called PECs at times to communicate. He also uses certain hand gestures and signals. He's learned certain signs when it comes to sign language. So he actually has developed a form of communication. While not considered traditional by the greater population, it is communication nonetheless. So even when you have a child that technically you would look at and say, well, this child is nonverbal because they're not actually using words to communicate, that's not really what nonverbal means. And so I think for many years we've been using that term out of context. And part of the reason is because many times when you see the face of autism, number one, you're typically going to see children that can use words, that are speaking. Number two, you're typically going to see a certain type of child. And I will say that most of the time, when I see anything about autism, they will always show children that have certain types of skills, certain types of abilities. And for me, that really doesn't give a accurate reflection of the autism community. While yes, there are children that are able to communicate, that are able to use words, that are able to do different things, be a bit more independent, there are large amount of children and adults who are unable to communicate in a traditional sense their wants, their needs, their desires. And I often feel like that group of individuals, though, that group of autistic individuals is, in a sense, sometimes ignored in this conversation of autism. It's kind of like when I start to talk about autism in the Black community or autism with girls or women. Many times, the behaviors, the perspectives, the attitudes towards these children and adults who are autistic are very different, because the face that the world often sees with autism is a savant, is someone who speaks maybe, very much, or someone who has at least mastered the ability to communicate on their own. And we don't often give light to those who suffer from more of an intellectual disability, who have more of a delay, developmentally speaking, and who are unable to do a lot of the basic things that we kind of expect children to do as they grow up and as they age and develop. So I love to have conversations about this concept of nonverbal versus non-speaking, because I feel like so many don't get heard in the mix of this autism awareness and acceptance and appreciation, because the light is not always on those who have more challenges and require more support. And notice, as I'm speaking about this, I'm very, very selective with the wording, because I start to realize the more that I learn about autism, the more that I engage with the autism community, and I go to trainings and events, and I learn more by listening to those who are actually autistic, the more that I recognize that there is so much that we don't connect with, because it's not part of our daily views, right? If we see any advertising when it comes to autism, if we see children on TV, or certain promotions regarding anything dealing with the autism community or autistic children and adults, we don't get a view of those who have severe challenges, who have severe impairments. And even when we do get the view, of course, we're not getting that perspective from the child or the adult who is autistic, because the assumption is, because they cannot speak in the sense that we speak, they don't have a voice. So I myself, as an auntie for autism, or a parent, or another provider or caregiver, we often think that we have to step in and speak for our autistic loved ones. And that couldn't be farther from the truth, right? We have to learn to identify their modes of communication. We have to learn to provide our autistic loved ones with the necessary supports so that they can learn and acquire communication at a level that allows them to interact with the rest of the world, right? And we can't impose our ideas about communication and what it should look like. We have to be sure that we are leaving room for an autistic child or an autistic adult to communicate in the manner that allows them to best share their expressions, their views, their perspectives. And many times that might be through a device. There are autistic children that use a device to type their words, and use that device to speak on their behalf. There are children like my nephew who use a device to put images together to say certain things. So on my nephew's tablet, he'll have things like "I want." So he'll click on "I want," and then he'll click on what he wants. or he'll have something that says, I want to go outside, or I want to go to the refrigerator. Other times, rather than using his device to communicate, my nephew will utilize different hand gestures and things of that sort. Hey, Tracy. And so, while communication is not using his lips to form words and make sounds, he's still communicating. So, it's important for me and my family and his teachers and his therapists and aides to be able to understand that he may not acquire language in the way that we want him to. He may not be able to communicate in the way that we want him to, or the way that the majority of the world communicates, but that's because he's different and he requires additional support and assistance. And that's what makes a condition like autism different, because it's not one of those things where you can give someone a medication and make them do, what you want them to do, or make them fit in with the rest of the world. It's something that impacts the way a child or an adult engages with the world. And one thing that I learned after attending a couple of different conferences where actually autistic adults spoke about this concept of eye contact, verbal versus nonverbal, high functioning, low functioning, all these words that we tend to use to describe those who are actually autistic. Some of the words are really hurtful, because while communicating using my words is comfortable for me, it's it's natural and it flows for me, it could create anxiety in folks like my nephew or other autistic children and adults. It could create some kind of a blockage where the words can't even come out, even though he may be processing these words possibly in his mind. He may be processing these words and wanting to say them. Because sometimes I would find that we would try to get him to say certain things, and he'll open his mouth as if to form the words, but he's just opening his mouth because for whatever reason, the words don't come out. Now, while the words don't come out, this character sure knows how to make every sound effect under the sun, and you actually might hear him in the background every so often. So if you know how to make all those sounds, at least my voice will say this, if you know how to make all those sounds, why can't you make this sound? Why can't you form those sounds into words? But what am I doing there? I'm forcing upon him my idea of communication, my preferred choice of communication. That doesn't really work. So, leaving room for understanding means that we're open to appreciating differences. And if we're truly going to say that we are aware of what we call autism, and we are aware that support is needed and assistance and guidance, then we have to be able to accept that what is going to come out of that child or adult is not going to look like what we expect. We have to come to accept that there are going to be differences in communication, in socialization, in behaviors, in desires. I mean, I will tell you, one of the major things that happens with many who are autistic is they may have aversions to things. And I'll probably do a whole session on this concept of the food aversions, or the food preferences, or sensitivities to texture and color. As an example, my nephew will eat mixed vegetables, but he won't eat certain colors. So he'll eat the green, and anything that's green, he'll eat it. If it's orange, no. If it's yellow, like a corn type texture, he'll eat that. But for some reason, there's a thing with the orange, but he'll eat corn. He won't eat eggs. And I'm imagining, maybe texturally speaking, color is an issue. There may be some other sensitivities, or the smell. But you'll find that he kind of sticks to certain categories of foods, which is something that I've seen very common with a lot of children and adults who are autistic. And sometimes I see programs where, people try to kind of train the child to get used to eating more different types of food. But I feel sometimes that that's a bit harsh, and that's just my opinion. I think that trying to expose, for example, my nephew to different foods is something that has to be eased into and give him an opportunity to make the choice. And it's worked in a lot of instances. And I say the same thing with the wording. It's important for us as family members, as caregivers, as those who have an appreciation, a love for someone who is autistic, to be able to understand that our words matter. So we can't like stand next to our autistic family member and say all kinds of things about them in their presence, because the words do matter. They can hear the words that we say. In the same likeness that I can say something to my nephew like, "Hey Jeremiah, you want to go out?" He instantaneously will get up and want to, head and get his book bag. So if he can hear that, don't you think he can hear me talking about him? If I'm saying to someone, well, he can't do that. I think he can hear that, right? I think he can hear some of the language that I use. So I'm a real big proponent of using the proper words, finding ways to be connected to the actually autistic community, and learning what the triggers are, learning what the things are that cause problems in the community, learning from those who are actually autistic what are the proper words that we should be using. Now, granted, and Tracy and I had this conversation yesterday, granted, we all are different. It's going to take all of us time to learn and identify and connect. And we also have to keep in mind that the community that is being expressive, that is sharing their thoughts and their feelings and how they are impacted, is also able to communicate, right? In the instance of my nephew and others like him who are non speaking, we don't know what their feelings are about anything aside from maybe the limited categories of information that we're able to get. For example, I know that my nephew loves certain types of food because I can even pull out, the little grocery coupons or, the little circulars that come to the house. And I can say, hey, what do you want from here? And he'll point out literally. And it's not like he's just pointing at random. He actually will identify the things that he wants. So to me, again, thinking about how words matter is all about perspective. And we, as the loved ones of those who are autistic, we have a job to do. We have to learn as much as we can, but we have to learn with a discerning eye and ear, right? We have to be able to understand that we can't impose what the world is saying, right? What the other folks who are autistic are saying. We can't just automatically impose that on our loved one, because we have to give some room to understand that maybe our loved one doesn't feel a certain way. Or maybe if they develop a certain level of language and are able to verbalize certain things in a different way that we can understand, maybe they won't have the issues, the concerns, the questions that others in the community do, right? Because, I could be a Black female and have another Black female next to me, and we could have completely differing views. So we have to kind of leave room for that kind of positioning. But at the same token, I think it's really important for us to be able to get as much information from the actually autistic community. So I'm real into that, and I actually want to spend a little bit of time before I close out tonight, sharing some actually autistic perspectives. Again, I tell you that you can find a lot of information on Instagram. Just put a hashtag in and you'll be able to find things like actually autistic, Black autistics, Black autism, um, 30 days of autistic I believe it's 30 days of autistic voices. There's just so many different hashtags that you can look to if you want to educate yourself a bit more on the actually autistic voice. All in all, I want to summarize by saying this: words do matter. And when we're talking about nonverbal versus non-speaking, we have to keep things into understanding. Like, you have to look at definitions, right? When I say nonverbal, that means I'm not able to share information at all. Because when I say nonverbal, verbal behavior includes things like crying and arms out and pointing and sign language, using devices. So if you can do those things, you are able to verbalize. You're verbal. You're just not verbal in the context of using words from your mouth to say what it is that you feel or desire and things like that. However, if you're able to do something in order to communicate your wants, your wishes, your desires, you are verbal. So in technicality, we would have to say someone who is not able to use the words out of their mouth kind of thing is non-speaking. And I like to add to that, non-speaking yet, right? They may not be speaking right now, but I've heard so many different stories about progression, right? Because we are dealing with a developmental condition. We are dealing with a situation where the way that your child would develop over time is impaired a bit, right? We're losing some abilities because we need additional support to do certain things. And so when you see autism listed as a developmental disability, we know that someone who has a disability requires additional supports or accommodations or assistance. So it's not, I'm going to throw medication at this child or adult. I am going to provide support and assistance and understanding. So when we talk about this month of autism, and again, I keep telling you that we see all kinds of words out there. We see awareness, we see acceptance, we see appreciation, acknowledgement. I mean, I see so many different variations. But ultimately speaking, if we are aware and we have an understanding and we are receiving of a different way of doing things and seeing things and a different way of interacting with the world when we're dealing with those who are autistic, then we have to be able to know that the next step from awareness is now acceptance. And if you are accepting, that means that you are giving room for differences. So let's take a look at a couple of things before we close out. I wanted to first take a look at some actually autistic voices because I know that in a lot of groupings, we're talking about um, the importance of Autism Month actually being focused on actually autistic voices. And while I understand that, I can't speak to the needs and desires of the autism community, I can only speak to my experiences and the things that I have learned as I've educated myself in this last 15 years, right? So let's take a look at this 30 days of autistic voices. This is a hashtag on Instagram. And in essence, a number of different autistics are chiming in on this month and trying to be helpful to the rest of us in sharing their experiences. So we're going to go through a couple of them at this point. Um, so let's take a look here. Black autistic pages I follow. So a lot of times people give advice on different autistics to follow. I see one called at Autistics Unmasked and at Joseph Hill 3794. Again, it's always up to you to check out whatever it is that you want to check out and educate yourself. Autism doesn't always present itself through signs of regression. So here's something really interesting. When my nephew was about 2 years old, he, in essence, was progressing in a way that we would typically expect. He started, saying a few words here and there. He was doing a lot of the things that we would expect a child to do at different stages. And then there was a point in time where he stopped speaking. He stopped doing certain things, and he did what we would call regressed into, just not having certain developmental levels reached. Um, in this case, this person is talking about her son didn't suddenly lose skills and become a different child. He didn't start talking and then suddenly stop. His speech development was extremely slow from the beginning. He didn't walk flat on his feet and then suddenly start tiptoeing. He walked on his toes literally as soon as he took his first steps. He didn't play with his toys in the typical way and then suddenly show no interest. He started lining up his toys and hyper focusing. So the beauty with this story is this person is saying basically what we typically will hear about autism and what the signs are didn't happen in her case. Two autistic people are the same. No two autistic children, no two autistic adults are the same. we have differences at all levels, and we have to be able to acknowledge that and recognize those issues. Um, so let's see. Amplify Black autistic voices. I've been seeing this a lot recently. And I think it's because um, I would describe it as there are a lot of things that happen in the autism community and a lot of faces that you typically see associated with autism. And one of the reasons that I really started doing this type of educational outreach was that I wanted to share more voices, in particular Black voices. When my nephew started coming up, it was very rare that we would see other Black autistic kids. Very, very rare. I don't even think I met any females until my nephew got a little bit up in age, probably closer to his middle school age. So mostly just children that did not look like my nephew, and that was a challenge because early on it was like, are there any other kids like my nephew? You want to see that someone looks like you and has dealt with your type of experience. So this I've seen a lot. It's just something that we're going to be definitely tapping into as we go throughout this month. Autistic joy. One of the things that I recognize with the autism community is different children and adults do different things, and some may do certain behaviors which are soothing to them or are things that allow them to be themselves. And sometimes we have to be clear about what that is. Oftentimes we talk about food as if it's an obsession, but what about if it's just favorite foods, right? What about if we left room for that? Sometimes we say they're obsessing over toys, but what about if those toys are the things that give them happiness? Right? Do we ever see it from that perspective? Because sometimes I feel like we see things in a negative light. And again, those words matter, right? Favorite foods versus food aversions, right? It makes a difference in the way that we perceive behavior. And I think that helps a lot. That's why I love this words matter. Black autistic creator learns new things all the time. So a lot of Black autistic creators share their perspectives here on Instagram. So definitely something to look at. Autism myth: autistic people lack empathy. Well, this is a complicated topic, just like this person is saying. No two autistic people are the same. So it's really a bad idea to generalize about us. Here's the truth: some autistic folks have little to no empathy at all, and that's okay. Remember, a lack of empathy is not a lack of compassion. So, again, just like any average person, an autistic person can also have some of the same experiences. So, it's not really that different in that context, right? I like talking about what brings me autistic joy. Many times we don't see behaviors as bringing autistics joy, and that's something that I really wish we would do more of. Is look at behaviors in a different light. All right, we're at about 29 minutes. I'm going to try to keep this to 30 minutes, but I wanted to make sure that I go through a couple of these. April is Autism Awareness, Acceptance / Appreciation Month. So notice these words, right? Words matter. And in the community, they're trying to leave room for more views and perspectives. Autistic joy is worth sharing and celebrating. I love the way my mind can see and appreciate both the tiny details and the whole tapestry of the big picture, and weave seamlessly between the two. I love bridging the gap between theoretical understanding and practice wisdom. I love thinking in patterns and connecting ideas. Look at the word choice: thinking in patterns, right? Not repetitive behaviors. Thinking in patterns and connecting ideas. I watched my nephew one time do this thing where he was taking his blocks and he was stacking up the blocks in this, like, it was just like this outlandish, like he was angling the blocks in a way where I was like, come on, Jeremiah, like there's no way the blocks are going to stand up at that angle. They were like leaning. They reminded me like South Florida high rises is what it reminded me of. But when I started thinking about it, I was like, that's his way of expressing himself. That's what he's enjoying doing. So why not let him do what makes him feel good? So nonetheless, went through a couple of perspectives, something that I want to do each night as we go through this 30 days of autism. And I really hope that you can take a little bit of what I've discussed tonight and apply it. There are so many different things that we can really engage with when it comes to talking about autism, amplifying autistic voices, amplifying Black autistic voices, women and girls, really looking at different ways to support the autism community. And I'll also give you my hashtag. So if you want to look back at some of my old videos, I started this whole series when I was on Instagram. So you can go back and find some of my old videos and different topics that I discussed. But April is Autism Acceptance Month. It's a great time for you to step in a little deeper in on that awareness and transitioning over to the acceptance side. And again, a couple of reminders. Saturday, April the 9th, the South Florida Autism Charter Schools Walk is happening at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's supposed to be a really, really great event this year with jam-packed activity. Great day for the family. If you want to support, please don't hesitate to connect. I'll be on LinkedIn Audio tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time talking about probate I'll be talking about real estate and the probate process. And last but not least, always feel free to tap into me, send me an email at sandyblaw305@gmail.com if you have any questions or concerns. And again, please support my YouTube channel, Sandy, the letter B, the word law. I am loving the support that I'm getting so far. Would love to build up this channel and educate even more people. So please don't hesitate to tap in and support throughout Autism Acceptance Month. So I thank you guys so much for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. See, I got to about 32 minutes, so I'm getting a little bit better at this. So look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow night, probably around the same time. Have a good one, guys.